All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. This is not a requirement for this class, but I've kind of organized everything on a Google Classroom. If you've used that before, great. If not, it's pretty simple. If you already have a Google account, you should be able to access the app pretty easily. So you can scan the QR code right here, or just jot down this code at the bottom, and you should be able to join using that. If it's not working, I can show you after.
Closer can I get?
Did it work?
Yeah.
Okay, sweet. Yeah, so on there I've posted the course syllabus. So you'll see on that enrollment form right there, it says, I received a course syllabus. That syllabus is located on the Google Classroom. So each lesson has reading assignments to it. So on the syllabus, you can figure out what lesson is for that day, what you're going to be required to read, and stuff like that. So on the classroom, if you go to the Classworks tab, depending if you go to the website or the app, it'll look a little bit different. But under classwork, everything's organized by lesson. So today's lesson 1. It'll show you the reading assignment. I've posted all the PowerPoints on there too. So if you like to look at those before class, or if you like to print those out on a handout and then take your notes on there, great. I also post like additional videos and stuff, so stuff that I find helpful for the topic that we're going over. I'll post it on the lesson there as well. And anything else that might come up, like practice questions. So the course schedule is also on there towards the top. And if you need to reach me, my email should be on there as well, under people. So if you got a question, just reach out, email me. I get back to you pretty quick. So this is just an overview of the syllabus. So each lesson has a layout for what you should study for that day. And I'll go over which book we use for this course, but it'll have what chapters or pages to read, and then down below the topics. So overall, there's 18 lessons in this course. That's divided into 3 stages. So at the end of each one of those stages, we do a stage exam. And so the exam kind of goes over everything we've covered so far within that stage. The very last one is like a final exam, going over everything we've covered. And that's really just a practice exam to go take the FAA written test. And so I use that to sign people off. So if you take the test that I provide to you and you pass it with more than 80%, I will give you an endorsement in your logbook approving you to go take the FAA written test. Oftentimes, if somebody even barely squeaks by and they get 80%, I still encourage them to continue studying even more before signing up to take the written test. Some people are very excited once they finish the class, like, I'm going to go take my written test, and then, always want to push for a higher score. So just like your driving test, to get your pilot's license, you need to take a written test as well. So like, show up to the DMV, take a written test to get your driver's license, and then you go do a practical test with an examiner in the car. It's kind of the same process to get your pilot's license, and this course is really designed to get you prepared for that written test. So some distinguishers between a ground school and a ground lesson. So this is considered a ground school. It provides the foundational knowledge to go take the written test with the FAA. A ground lesson is something that you would cover with your personal instructor before a flight. And so if you're going to go practice takeoffs and landings that day with your instructor, you will meet before the lesson. You'll talk about how to perform a takeoff, how to perform a landing, and then you'll go do your flight lesson. Sometimes it'll be specific lessons, so cross-country planning, weather, airplane performance, stuff like that. So it's some of the differences between ground school and ground lesson. Some tips for success for this course. I think people underestimate how much studying is involved with aviation in general. In particular, this class, we meet twice a week, 2 hours each lesson, which seems like a lot. That's like a college course basically, but it isn't enough to fully cover every topic. And so that's where self-study really comes into play. You have to do the reading assignments at home. I'll show you some materials where you can access practice tests and practice questions. So as we go over each topic, you want to study the practice questions for each one of those, because the question bank that the FAA uses is like 1,000 questions. And so they'll pick random questions from 1,000, and you want to be as familiar as possible with all of those. So treat this like a self-study course. Do the reading, do the practice questions, take notes however you'd like to. If you like pen and paper, cool. If you like to do computer, tablet, whatever. Take notes as you study, bring those questions in. If a practice question doesn't make sense, write it down or screenshot it, bring it in. We could talk about it in class. It's kind of the nice thing about an in-person ground school course is that you can ask questions. So required materials, the textbook that we use is called the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge. Looks like this. It's about this thick. So all of the FAA publications are available for free as downloads. So if you just look up the title or the code, so it should be 808325C as the latest version. You could purchase a textbook from a lot of different supply stores. So like one like Sporty's or what's it called? My Pilot Store. There's a few others. Amazon has it as well. I think it's like $25 right now, $30. Or if you don't mind reading a PDF, you can just download the PDF for free right now. So all of our lessons are based off of this, and so are the reading assignments. Some other things you'll need are right here. This thing in the middle is called a flight computer, or E6B. It's this little device right here. You'll learn to hate this thing. So we use that it's kind of an old school method to calculate things like time, distance, fuel burn, things like that for flight planning. A sectional plotter, which is just a ruler, really. So we use that to plot courses on a paper chart or map. So if you happen to use Amazon, all this stuff is available on Amazon, or you can go to aviation supply stores like Sporty's or anything else, and they'll have those as well. Yeah, the flight computer, you can get it as kind of like this cardstock material. I think these ones are like $15. You could also get metal ones, which will last forever in your flight bag. Those are closer to like $40. Sectional plotter, you can get one with a rotating center or one that's stationary. Personally, I like the one that rotates. So if you could find the option of the rotating one, I would opt for that one. So some recommended materials. So not completely necessary, but it'll help you a lot. So 2024, this is a regulation book, so I'll show you that in a minute. Again, you can access these for free. I'll show you some ways where you can access those on the FAA's website. Personally, I like hard copies of most things. Especially as a student pilot, it's really nice to be able to tap things out and locate regulations and rules and things pretty easily. So you want to pick one of those up, as well as a source of whatever you want to use. Test prep book. So this is the one that I use. It's by Gleim. And so all this is just practice questions for the written test. So Gleim makes a really good one. A few other companies produce their own. It's really all the same stuff. There's a few apps available, so I can show you those if you prefer an electronic method. Page tabs. Those things are awesome. All of your books are just going to be covered in all these page tabs. They're really useful.
Excuse me, real quick. You said for the test prep book, you have a private pilot one? Is that what you said?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. It's not necessary. This is just the one that I've picked up. The company's called Gleim. A few other ones are available, and I'll show you in an electronic way. It's pretty useful. So when you sit down to go take the written test with the FAA, you can't bring anything with you because they don't want you taking electronics or material to cheat, anything. But they'll sit you down. You'll get one of these books for the test. It's not like top secret or something. It's publicly available. So this is a supplement book, and it's just filled with figures or pictures or diagrams of reference material. So a question will ask you, refer to figure 30. What is this saying? And so you can access this yourself if you look it up by the name, or you can purchase this on Sporties or Amazon as well. And so as you're doing practice questions, it's kind of nice to have a separate book from, the little photo they put in the test prep book, or if you're using a website, sometimes you can open the figure, but then you have to go back to the question. And so it's kind of nice having them separate. Again, I think these are like $8 on Sporties. So this is a free test prep material if you don't want to go through, getting a full textbook. So the company Sporties, they produce a lot of training material and courses, as well as like supplies and things like that. So if you set up an account with them, you get free access to their test prep page. It's access to their ground school, but all the pages are locked except for the test prep material. So I think it's really useful. I've created a Google Doc. Really, especially this lesson is to introduce people to aviation in general. Sometimes people show up with zero history or knowledge of how to get their license or aviation in general. When I was going through the process, I kind of wish I had something like this to ask questions and kind of see what the steps were. You kind of end up in like a rabbit hole on YouTube, and people give you different opinions. You don't really know what is right or something. Introduce everybody to aviation, prepare you to take the FAA written test. If you're already licensed, it's a good kind of refresh course. Sometimes I've had people attend that got their license 20 years ago, and they're like, I forgot everything. And so now they kind of need a refresh. So first, we will start by explaining who the FAA is. So Federal Aviation Administration, they're the governing body that governs commercial, general aviation. Anything that flies really is under the FAA. They provide the rules and regulations to what we can and can't do. So those regulations are published in the Federal Aviation Regulations, or the FARs, under the Code of Federal Aviation Regulations. So I showed this book before. So FAR, Federal Aviation Regulations, and then the second part of this book is the AIM, Aeronautical Information Manual. So the rules that apply to us are under something called Title 14. There's a lot of different titles, and they apply to different things. There's titles for agriculture, titles for food and drugs, stuff like that. So this specific title is for aviation. And then within that title, there's different parts to it. You'll get really familiar with these. So Part 61 basically outlines everything you need to do to get a specific license, whether it's your private license, your commercial, whatever. And then Part 91 outlines all the rules for aviation. So, hey, I have my license now. What rules do I need to follow? Different ways to access those regulations. You can get the book, like I said, website. So that'll be ecfr.gov. That'll be kind of the most updated version of them, because they publish this book every year, and so things can change during that time. There's also an app. I think it's $10, but nice thing about that is you can put it on multiple devices, and it renews. It doesn't renew, but it updates yearly. So instead of going out and buying a brand new massive encyclopedia every year, the app just refreshes every time something new is published. Personally, I use both. When I really need to study something, I like to use the book. When I'm instructing, the app is really convenient because it's either on your phone or iPad. You can reference it pretty quickly.
$10 for the app?
I think so. That's what it was at some point. Nice thing about the app too is you can look up words. So if you're like, I knew it had something to do with this, and then you look up the word, you can find what the regulation was. Cool. So when can you start training? Kind of common question. People want to know if they need to meet certain criteria before even starting training. And really there is no criteria that you need to meet. You can start training at any age. You don't have any medical requirement to start training. However, I do recommend people get a medical exam before beginning training because it's going to tell them if they qualify or not to get their license. It's better to find that out sooner than later after you spend 40 hours in an airplane and all that time and money studying. So part of your requirements to get your license will be to fly the airplane by yourself, and we call that solo. In order to do that, you need to hold a medical certificate and you need to hold something called a student pilot certificate. It really just looks like a pilot's license. It just says student pilot on it. So if you're on a date, they probably can't tell the difference. Just show them your student pilot and say, oh, I'm a pilot. So you need to possess those in order to solo. So those are some of the requirements before proceeding during training. And we'll go over the medical requirements as well. So general sequence, this is usually geared towards people that are wanting to go to the commercial level if they want to fly professionally. So you start off with your private pilot certificate. And this really depends on a few things as far as like how long it's going to take you, how often you can train, and how proficient you are. So if people can dedicate at least 3 days a week, sometimes 4, depending on their time, and they're pretty consistent in their studying, they can get this done, their training done, in probably less than 6 months. Obviously, people have careers, they have things to do outside of this, and so sometimes people are only able to train once or twice a week. In that case, probably take closer to 6 to 12 months. If you're only able to train once or twice a week and you also don't study before your lessons, that's going to take you probably twice as long. Reason for that is because your instructor needs to take time to explain things to you. So if your assignment was to read about the weather and then you come in for your lesson, you didn't do it, now your instructor needs to explain that entire lesson, make sure you understand it, and then you go fly. So a private pilot, that gives you permission to fly passengers in good weather, really. So like right now, this is perfect flying. This is called VFR conditions, visual flight rules. You might hear me throw those around a little bit, VFR, IFR. Those are kind of the two broad categories of aviation. So one is visual flight rules. That means you need to be able to see where you're going. And then IFR, or instrument flight rules, means you're able to fly into clouds. So as a private pilot, you're able to fly when the weather's nice, pretty much. So after that, people get their instrument rating, which is kind of like an attachment to your private pilot certificate. And that gives you the training and proficiency to go fly into bad weather. Not like you're going to go fly through tornadoes and thunderstorms and things like that, but like we've had a marine layer recently. And so if you are IFR rated and you have an instrument clearance, you can go fly through those clouds to your destination. After that, people will get their commercial pilot certificate, and general requirement for that is 250 hours. And that means you can legally be paid to fly. That doesn't give you permission to go fly for Southwest. It just means you can be hired. And most places want somebody with more hours than 250. You may find a gig. People have done things like banner towing, crop dusting, things like that. But there's kind of a gap between when you get your commercial certificate and when you can go fly, I guess, professionally or like flying passengers, really, for money. And so in order to bridge that gap, people build time doing other things. So typically you can instruct as a commercial, once you get your commercial certificate, you can get your flight instructor certificate, and that gives you permission to teach people. And so as you do that, you can log those hours. So if we go do a flight lesson and it's a 1-hour lesson, I can log that 1 hour just like you do. And so people usually build their time doing that. As a flight instructor, there's a few different certificates you can get. There's your initial one, and that means you can teach private pilots, you can teach commercial pilots. There's flight instructor instrument, or II, and that means you can teach instrument students. And then there's multi-engine instructor, means you can teach people in an aircraft that has 2 engines or more. So usually as people are time building as a flight instructor or whatever other job they're doing, they get their commercial multi-engine rating. And so since you already have your commercial rating, this just approves you to fly commercially with 2 engines. And that reason for doing that is it's a requirement to get your airline transport pilot, or ATP, which is a 1,500-hour requirement. There's a few other things. You need to be multi-engine rated, 1,500 hours. And then there's more specifics about how much of that should be cross-country and stuff like that. Anybody in here want to go fly commercially? Yeah, most? Yeah, so it is. I will forewarn you, it's kind of a long road, but it is enjoyable. It's rewarding. I just like to tell people it's a little bit longer than the internet makes you think. Like you look up a video, or like you get an advertisement for a flight school, and it's like, we can get you to airline pilot in 4 days. So it's a long process.
Is that like 5 years?
It depends on a few things. You can probably get up to like this stage 1 to 2 years. And then the time building depends on how much time you can build to instructing or whatever other job you're doing. Time building itself usually takes people 18 to 24 months. So in the end, yeah, 4 or 5 years, start to finish. There are schools that advertise it like, we'll get you from here to here in a year, and then you're going to build your time in another year, so that's 2 years.
It's like ATP, right? That's the school that does it. Yeah, I get a lot of advertising from them.
Yeah. Don't even think about an airplane because you get ads for them. You'll get them in your sleep. So next we'll go over the steps, how to become a private pilot. So what's required of you, and some eligibility requirements. So step number 1, meet the eligibility requirements of, you'll see these numbers pop up. These are the regulations, 14 CFR 61-103. Receive an FAA medical certificate, meet aeronautical experience requirements. So aeronautical experience just means you meet the hour requirements, or you've accomplished certain tasks. Pass the FAA knowledge test. You generally just call it a written test with at least 70%. So the official FAA test, you just need 70%. My class, however, I require 80% on the final in order to sign you off to take this. Reason for that is I don't want to sign you off. If you get a 70%, you go take that test and get 65%, because then that score goes against me. Step number 5, pass your practical exam, also called a checkride. So once you've accomplished all this, you go take a practical test with an examiner. It's not your instructor. It's not an instructor at your flight school. It's somebody approved by the FAA to conduct these tests. So part of that eligibility requirement, step number 1, part of that is becoming a student pilot. For that, you need to be at least 16 years old. Is anybody less than 16? No, you good? I gotta double check. I've had people like 14 years old in here, and they're like, does it make sense to start training now? I'm like, you're gonna spin your wheels for like 2 years. So only requirement for that is to be at least 16, be able to read, speak, write, and understand the English language. So universal language in aviation is English. Lucky for most of us as native speakers. You are gonna kind of learn a second language in aviation, learning to speak on the radios and things like that. So next is the eligibility for private pilot. You need to be at least 17 years old. So student pilot, 16, in order to solo the plane. In order to get your license, you need to be 17. This one just repeats, read, speak, write, and understand the English language. Obviously, if you've already got your student pilot certificate, this has been checked off as well. Receive a logbook endorsement from an authorized instructor to take the knowledge test. So if I sign you off to go take the test, that would meet this requirement. Pass the knowledge test, the written test, receive flight training and logbook endorsement certifying you're prepared to take the practical test. So when it's time for you to go take your check ride or practical test to get your license, your instructor has to endorse you, which just means they approve you or sign off your logbook saying that you're ready to go take their practical test. They don't want people just showing up for the test and they're not ready. So they need approval to go do that. Pass the practical test, comply with appropriate sections of the regulations and hold a U.S. student pilot certificate. So a little bit more about the written test. It'll be scheduled by yourself. You just go to FAA.psiexams.com. PSI is the company that administers a ton of tests. I'm not sure if anyone's used them before for other professions. But yeah, they'll administer tests at one of their testing centers for like cosmetology, plumbing, aviation, like they do everything. So you schedule that yourself once you are endorsed to go take the test. There's a lot of testing centers. We have one here. A couple other schools at the airport have some. There's one in Irvine as well. So you really just find what's convenient for you, schedule it when you're ready. Must be at least 15 years old. Reason for that is because it expires in 2 years. So you can't get your license till you're 17. And so if this expires at 15, or in 2 years, it doesn't make sense to take it before 15 years old. I generally recommend people take the written test towards the end of stage 2 of flight training, or even stage 3. Reason for that is because obviously it's a lot of studying, a lot of book knowledge, but then once you kind of apply that to what you've been learning in the plane itself, you can kind of bridge the gap between what some of this stuff actually means and put it into context, and you'll generally score a lot better. So the name of the test you will take, the code for that is PAR, Private Pilot Airplane. I know this text is kind of small, but number of questions on that test is 60. Time allotted is 2.5 hours, and you need 70% on that test. Down here, I know you can't really see it that well, goes over all the topics. And so it's really just telling you there's an even distribution of all topics, whether it's regulations, weather, aerodynamics, airplane systems, aeronautical charts, stuff like that. So it's really randomized. You're not going to get 50 questions on regulations and then 10 on aerodynamics. It's pretty balanced. So once you take the written test, or when you finish the written test, you'll get a printout at the testing center. It'll say your name, what test you took, the date, and the score at the bottom. And below that, it'll show the codes of the questions you may have gotten wrong. That's all you get, is you get codes. And so you use these codes to reference the certification standards book, which try not to go too much in detail because it just doesn't matter, won't make sense. So when you go to take your practical test, they use a book called Certification Standards. And each topic in that book, what they have to cover during your check ride, has a code next to it. And so when you take the written test, each of these topics has a code. And so if you get a question wrong on aerodynamics, it'll show up as a code. And so you have to look that up and say, what does this gibberish mean? Oh, I missed a question on aerodynamics. That's about as much as you know about what you got wrong. It won't tell you the exact question. And so you kind of have to remember back to, okay, which question did I struggle with? Which question was asked about aerodynamics? And then kind of jog your memory that way. So the reason why this is important is because when you go take your practical test, you'll take this printout with you to the practical test. And they have to incorporate these questions somehow into your check ride. So if you missed 10 questions on aerodynamics, they're going to ask you about aerodynamics to make sure you understand it before they sign you off to be a pilot. And it's not like they're just going to bullet point ask you, like, what does this mean? What does this mean? What does this mean? They're going to incorporate it into a scenario, really. And they're going to kind of make it conversational. And as you go along and you meet, as you demonstrate knowledge for each of those, they'll check it off. Just tell me if I'm going too fast. Don't slow down. Something cool. So resources to obtain a medical certificate. So it makes sense. In order to be a pilot, you need to be healthy, right? They don't want people just falling out of the sky. So your first step is determine what are your intended operations. Are you just wanting to fly for fun? Are you wanting to fly at the commercial level? Because there's different tiers or classes to your medical certificate. Next, you go to medexpress.faa.gov. So create an account with them, and you'll fill out a medical form. So medexpress.faa.gov. Locate an aviation medical examiner. So these are just doctors that have been approved by the FAA to provide these physicals, really. So they signed up. This isn't their only job, like they're family doctors, but they also volunteered to do these as well. I say volunteer, but they get paid very well doing these.
Save $150 just to show up.
At least, yeah.
30 minutes too. Yeah, dude,
Yeah.
isn't that long? It's a good thing.
Yeah. So bring printed medical form. So the form that you fill out on MedExpress, bring that form with you to the doctor. And it's really just physical. They're going to make sure you're healthy. Special emphasis on heart conditions like blood pressure, diabetes. They're going to check your vision and hearing. So those are kind of key points, really. So make sure all your documents reflect the same. So when you create an account for MedExpress, if your driver's license says your middle name on it, make sure you include that on these forms, because that'll show up on your medical certificate. And then when you get your student pilot certificate, make sure you do the same. So name matches all your documents, and address. Sometimes, especially if you go to apply for an airline and they say, oh, all your papers have your middle name, but this one doesn't. Who are you? They'll make you get that fixed before flying for an airline. So it's just better to catch it early. So this table goes over what are the different classifications of medical certificate. So there's first class, second class, and third class, and those are dependent on what type of operations you're going to be doing. It also depends on your age. So if you're younger than 40 or older than 40, or 40 and older. So this first table here at the top, if you're under 40 years old, we're going to start with third class here at the bottom. So third class is blue. That's going to be required for operations as a student pilot, recreational pilot, and private pilot. So you need at least a third class in order to solo as a student pilot. So third class privileges, if you're under 40 years old, are good for 60 calendar months. And most things in FAA language are written as calendar months. So that means if you got your third class medical today, 18th of June, that means it's going to be good for 60 calendar months. So June 2029, the last day of the month. So second class medical, that's going to be for operations required for commercial certificates. So if you're flying charter, if you're flying second in command, something like that. Those operations are good for 12 calendar months. And if you want to continue using those privileges, you need to renew your medical certificate. After those 12 months, it doesn't just expire. Your certificate just doesn't burst into flames and you can't use it anymore. You can still operate as a recreational or private pilot. There's a few other loopholes. You can operate as a flight instructor with a third class medical. But once you've passed those 12 months, it's good for an additional 48 calendar months for a total of 5 years. So first class medical. So if you are planning on going to airline level, you want to fly, have an ATP, that's good for 12 calendar months. And if you haven't gotten a medical yet, I would recommend applying for first class, because if your goal is to fly for an airline and you don't meet the medical requirements for first class medical, it's better to find out sooner than later. So same thing, that's good for 12 calendar months, and then you can continue to use third class privileges up to 60 calendar months. But if you are trying to use it for your job, you just have to renew it every 12 calendar months. So if you're 40 years or older, it's the same rules, it just shortens them. So a third class medical, instead of 60 calendar months, is good for 24 calendar months now. And then a second class medical, same as above, actually, it's only 12 calendar months. After that, you have an additional year for a total of 24 calendar months with third class privileges. First class, sadly, it's only good for 6 calendar months. So if you see an airline pilot at the airport, he's over 40, just know he's getting checked out every 6 calendar months. I know I've seen some where I kind of question, I'm like, are you okay? but they get checked out every 6 calendar months. Past that, they can continue to use second class medical privileges up to 12 calendar months, and then third class up to 24. So you'll get quite a few sample questions that are asking about medical certificates. So key points you want to ask yourself when looking at a question about this is what privileges are being asked about, how old is the pilot, and what class of medical. So you just want to look at those 3 points, because sometimes they'll throw you off. It'll say a 25-year-old pilot has a first class medical, how long can they use third class privileges? And so the wording kind of throws people off a little bit, or it'll ask about, you have a second class medical, how long can you operate with third class privileges? So just pay attention to the keywords. In addition to those medical certificates, you can also qualify for something called BasicMed. So BasicMed, you have to have previously held a medical certificate. You can't apply for this as a brand new pilot and say, hey, I'm just going to get BasicMed. I don't want a medical certificate. So you have to have held it previously. This allows you to fly with just a driver's license, not a medical certificate. Few rules. You have to complete a medical education course every 2 years, every 24 calendar months. Have a medical exam every 48 calendar months, regardless of age. So there's no age requirement for this. So with this, you just take the medical course, bring a form to your family doctor. So it's just a state licensed physician. It doesn't have to be an aviation medical examiner. They'll sign you off on the physical. You have to agree to a driver registration. That's it. It's pretty simple. So not as strict as medical certificates. Reason why people would want to get this instead is if it's inconvenient it's not very accessible to get to an aviation medical examiner, or if they don't intend on flying very much or commercially, really. You know, if somebody just flies for fun occasionally, maybe they own their own plane, they live out in Idaho, they're like, I don't need a first class medical, they can get this. So if you do have BasicMed, there's a few rules you need to follow. In my opinion, it's not very strict, and I'll tell you why. So maximum certificated weight of 6,000 pounds, which is a big plane. A training aircraft, like a Cessna, is 2,500 pounds, so you can fly an airplane twice as big. An aircraft that's authorized to carry more than 6 occupants. So if a plane was designed to have more than 6 seats, you can't fly it with BasicMed. Which is, again, a 6,000 pound plane with 6 seats is still pretty beefy. So that's including passenger seats as well as the pilot seat. And that doesn't mean that you can just take seats out and call it good. It can't be authorized or approved to have more than 6 seats. You could fly up to 18,000 feet MSL. Again, ceiling for this guy is 14,000 feet. You can't breathe very well at 18,000 feet, so you're probably not going to be flying up there very often. Up to 250 knots. Again, this guy can do half of that on a good day. So average cruising speed for one of these is probably 100 knots, 110, 20 knots. So that's a fast, heavy plane. So you are allowed to fly IFR or in instrument conditions if you are instrument rated. You're not allowed to fly for compensation or hire or as a commercial pilot with BasicMed. And you can only fly in the US. I think recently Mexico approved BasicMed. Yeah, you just have to double check or get authorization. So general sequence of flight training. I would say most flight schools follow this same pattern. This is how we do it here. So our flight training is divided into 3 stages, just like the ground school. The pre-solo stage, which is just an introduction, how to fly the airplane, what the controls do, components on the plane. Introductory maneuvers, you'll learn how to do stalls, power on, power off stalls, and you'll learn how to do takeoffs and landings in the plane, which in my opinion, that along with radios usually takes people the longest to get the hang of, but once you can figure out how to land the airplane and talk on the radios, everything else kind of falls into place. So at the end of the stage, you do a solo in the traffic pattern. So what that means is your instructor is going to stand next to the runway and he's going to watch you do circles. You're going to land on the runway, take off, circle again, land, take off, circle again. At least 3 times the first time. After that, you can do more if you want, but it's usually how it goes. I've heard confusion before. People think solo is like, oh man, I need to go from here to another airport by myself and back for the first time. Your very first solo is just you do a couple laps. It's pretty simple. You'll be a little scared. Your instructor will be hopefully not scared, but you'll be prepared. Otherwise, they wouldn't sign you off. At the end of each one of our stages, we have a stage check. So that means you meet with a different instructor and they kind of test you on everything you learned during that stage. So there's going to be like a knowledge portion in the classroom and then a flight portion where they'll ask you to do everything you should have learned in stage 1. And it's really just a checkpoint, making sure how you're progressing through the course. And they'll give you feedback, hey, you need to work on this, you know, your radios were good, but you need to work on this, and it gives you and your instructor things to improve on as you continue. Stage 2 is the cross-country stage. So you learn how to do performance maneuvers, how to do cross-country calculations. So given weather conditions and altitudes and stuff like that, you can calculate how long a flight will take you, how much fuel you're going to burn, stuff like that. Where it says dual just means you're with your instructor. And then solo just means you're by yourself. So you'll do a handful of cross-country flights with your instructor to get the hang of it. And then once you're both comfortable, they will send you somewhere by yourself and you'll most likely come back. Stage 3 is really pretty short. The longest stage is probably stage 1. That's what usually takes people the longest, has the biggest learning curve. You go from zero knowledge about airplanes to learning how to land by yourself. Stage 2, cross country, really just depends on weather and stuff. And then stage 3 is usually pretty quick. It's only a handful of flights. You do night training. So as a private pilot, you're required to have some night training, night cross country, and at least 10 takeoffs and landings at night. So that way, your first time flying at night isn't as a licensed pilot, if that makes sense. You're not like, I got a brand new license, I'm gonna go fly at night to Catalina. So you need some training. At the end of that stage, you'll do a long solo. And so it's a little different than the other cross-country solo in that it's just a bit longer. Instead of just going to 1 airport, you're gonna go to 2. So at least in our course, we have students fly from here to the beautiful Bakersfield and then Santa Barbara and then back here. So Santa Barbara's cool. Bakersfield, not so much. Okay, so you know. I know most of my family's out there, so I'm very familiar. And I've had plenty of flights to Bakersfield. And it's not even to the big airport at Bakersfield. There's a second airport at Bakersfield that you'll go to. So after you complete that, it's really just practical test prep. So reviewing everything you've learned and then getting ready to go take your check ride. Any questions so far? No? Good?
Just one question.
Mm-hmm.
During the calculation of for the solo, the fuel burn and everything, can we use ForeFlight or do we have to use the E6B?
You don't necessarily have to use E6B, but usually for private training, we require people to use paper to kind of ensure they have an understanding first, and then later on they can use ForeFlight. We also maintain copies of flight planning, and so it's easier to do with like paper nav logs and things like that. What to generally expect during a flight lesson. So you'll meet with your instructor, you'll do a weather briefing, and as time goes, your instructor will expect you to do a little bit more about the weather briefing, just to make sure everything's good to go for that day. A pre-flight briefing, you're going to discuss what you're going to be doing in the airplane that day, what you studied, answer any of your questions, probably test you a little bit just to kind of push your knowledge a little bit. Maneuver introduction, they're going to explain, hey, this is what we're going to do, this is how you do it. Your instructor is going to demonstrate that in the airplane and then you're going to be expected to do it, get some feedback. Obviously, your first time trying a maneuver or any sort of introduction, it's not going to be like, oh, that was horrible, try again. It's a gradual process. Like, you're going to be introduced to stalls and steep turns and things like that, and you're not expected to be perfect the first time. After that, do a post-flight briefing, so talk about how things went, what the study assignment will be for the next time, and document in your logbook what you did that day. So what you did and how much flight time you got. So what do you need to bring to flight training? Oftentimes, I'd say most of the time, people don't bring anything the very first lesson or like first few. Eventually, people start to bring too much. So first thing, you want to bring a knee board. So you receive a lot of instructions in the airplane from ATC, whether there's taxi instructions or directions in the airplane of where to fly. So you want something to be able to write that down. A knee board is just a clipboard you strap to your leg with a notepad on it. You jot things down, easy to reference. You can get as fancy as you want. I've seen some that have like cup holders and like flaps that come to the side with like 10 different pencil holders too. Keep it simple. You can get like a very simple aluminum one for like $15. Don't overdo it. Definitely want to get a logbook as well. I didn't include a picture of a logbook, but I'll show you that in a minute. Pens and pencils. You're going to burn through so many because you probably lose them in the airplane or they just fall as you're flying. You're going to want to carry put pens all over your body because you're going to be able to access them pretty quickly. If you guys are curious, my favorite pen is the Pilot G2.05. It's good for logbooks. A headset. So most common question and probably most common YouTube video you'll come across is like headset reviews and things like that, or what to get. It depends on a few things. Depends on your budget. You can get a headset on Amazon for as little as $150, or you can get a Bose for like $1,300. So it really depends where you fall in that budget, as well as features. So kind of the budget-friendly ones are going to be David Clark's, which are these green ones this guy's wearing. They're kind of iconic just because of the color, and they've been around for years. David Clark themselves have classics, which are no noise cancellation, no bells and whistles. Those are probably going to be close to like $200 or $300. The ones that we use here, if you guys have done demo flights here, are going to be Rugged Air. Those are like Amazon. It's going to squeeze your head a little bit. They get uncomfortable because they're pretty tight. Top tier ones, Bose, obviously, it's going to be top of the line, $1,300, noise cancellation, things like that. Another company called Lightspeed has an option called Lightspeed Zulu. I don't see them on this. They're pretty similar to Bose, noise cancellation, things like that. David Clark also has a noise cancellation version. Yeah, I would check out places like Sporty's, My Pilot Store. What's another one?
Facebook Marketplace.
Yeah, there you go. I tried that one time. I was hoping to come across some Bose. I'm like, man, maybe it's like somebody stopped flight training in the area. Maybe they're trying to get rid of their Bose, and it was like.
I got my Bose on offer for $450.
Did you really?
Yeah. So I would definitely look. It took me 3 months, but I found
Yeah, I was gonna say I tried like once and gave up. I was like, no. Yeah, my recommendation is find something that's comfortable. Maybe good reviews in that aspect. They're comfortable, and at least has noise cancellation. So if you could find something budget friendly that has noise cancellation, it'll be great. It's hard enough to understand radios, as well as your instructor trying to talk to you over other people's radios. So noise cancellation is very helpful. A dedicated flight bag. You don't need to purchase something that's labeled flight bag. If you have a backpack in your closet from like middle school, just use that. Like backpacks work perfectly. If you have like a tote or like small bag, you can use that. It doesn't need to be a specific $300 flight bag that you got online. But I call it dedicated because make sure its sole purpose is your flight training. If it's your overnight bag, it's your work bag and your flight bag, you're gonna leave stuff at home. Like I've had a handful of students have to cancel because like, oh, I took it out for school. I took my headset out for school. Or like I left my logbook at home because of school. So just have your flight bag, then have your school bag or work bag. On top of that, you'll need, it's called a view limiting device. People call it foggles, which is what this guy's wearing right here. You'll need to do at least 3 hours of instrument training during your private pilot training. And this is setting you up so that way, it's kind of like blinders. You can only see out of the bottom of these, and so you can only see the instrument panel in the airplane. You can't see outside. So that's training so that way if you ever accidentally enter a cloud or poor visibility, you can safely maneuver the aircraft to get out of it. It's not permission to go fly IFR, it's just you can protect yourself and get out of a cloud without losing control. Because without visual reference, and we'll talk about this later, it's really easy to become disoriented in the plane. Clouds, it feels like you're going light speed and it feels like the plane's leaning one direction, but then all of your instruments say, oh, I'm straight and level. So your body tells you one thing, but your airplane tells you another. Yeah, you can buy these anywhere. Personally, I like the ones that are blacked out because there's going to be times where you're flying into the sun, and if they're blacked out, it's kind of like sunglasses, so you can only see your panel though. These ones will still let sunlight in, and so it's going to be really bright and annoying, and you have to stare at your panel. So, makes it hard. I recommend carrying sunglasses. I know most are polarized. Try to avoid polarized sunglasses in the airplane, especially if you fly a glass panel, because the polarization makes it hard to see the panel. And it makes it hard to see a reflection of light off of another airplane. Bring water. Small planes don't have AC. Sorry to tell you. We have windows. We have windows and a big fan in the front. Yeah, especially as we get into summer. So bring a water bottle. Bring, insulated water bottles are everywhere now. Bring one of those. We have, they've installed a few, but we have a few water dispensers here. So bring your water bottle, fill it up. Bring that with you. We're getting into summer. Bring some electrolytes or something. There's a million different electrolyte brands now, and vitamin water, Gatorade, whatever. Comfortable shoes and clothes. You are allowed to fly in flip-flops. I don't recommend it. Just seems unsafe to me. You're going to end up kicking the landing gear or something by accident. Also, don't wear military grade, like really thick soles. It's hard to feel the rudder pedals. If you are prone to being pale, like myself, bring some sunblock. It gets very bright. Sun reflects off of the airplane. Go home sunburnt and be like, why am I sunburnt? Do you need an iPad or ForeFlight for flight training? No. So probably any pilot you follow on social media or YouTube or something has shown an iPad or shown ForeFlight. You don't need it. At the private level, the way we do training here is everything's paper. You learn the basics first. If you already have it, great. We could definitely show you how to use it, how to incorporate it into your flight training. But I wouldn't go out and buy a brand new iPad, go buy ForeFlight. It's just not necessary. During instrument training, it's extremely useful, and so probably by then you'd want to look into one. Or if a family member has one they're just not using and you want to borrow it, that's cool too. So if you are curious, ForeFlight is an app that gives you access to all of your aeronautical charts in one location, so you don't need to carry around stacks and stacks of paper. It's like back in the day, you used to carry maps in your car in the glove compartment, and then everyone upgraded to TomTom GPS, and then now everybody just has a GPS on their phone. Kind of like that transition. Everything aviation related can be in one app. Yeah, there's different tiers to it. There's like a basic one, it's $120 a year, that gives you access to all your maps and things like that. The last two are unnecessary. They're really, if you're flying semi-commercially, really, and you need like additional flight planning tools, those are great. Next tier is like $240, last one is $360 a year. So if you are going to get it eventually, you are perfectly fine just getting the basic model.
Question.
Yeah.
So for logbooks, is it usually preferred to have paper or like the book style or like electronic style?
Both. keep both. So primarily use paper and then have a backup. So back it up electronically or take photos. People lose their logbooks, and that's like throwing away $10,000. Like, unless you have a way to prove your flight time, it kind of just gets thrown away. And you can really only prove, with the FAA, you can only really prove up to your last license, because every time you apply for a license, you submit your hours. So let's say, oh, I got my commercial license, I had 260 hours, and then I lost it at 300 hours. I can only prove 260 of those. So yeah, take pictures of it, do scans, do electronic one on top of the paper. Yeah, honestly, treat it like a bar of gold. Like, don't leave it in your car, because people see a backpack in a car and they'll break your window, they'll steal it, and you're like, the only thing in there was my logbook. So it's not valuable to people stealing it, but to you it is.
What are some good apps or ways to back it up?
I have to double check. I know ForeFlight has one, so if you're already using it, you can log it on there. There was a few others, I forgot the name of them. Yeah, if you are looking into the iPad method, it's recommended to get one with cellular capability. That doesn't mean you need an active cell plan on your iPad, but it just needs to have the antenna in it. Yeah, so it needs to have the antenna in it, so that way it'll show your airplane moving on the map. That's really all it does. If you don't have that, it's not a big deal. If you ever attach something like a Sentry to your ForeFlight, it'll still show the airplane.
I'm assuming we can use the iPad as an e-board too, right?
Oh yeah, yeah, you can do your notes on there. Personally, I still use my notepad. I don't know why. I just don't like copying things down on the iPad. Yeah. So, private pilot privileges and limitations. Actually, let's go and take a short break. So, privileges and limitations. So, this is what you can and can't do with a private pilot certificate or license. So, before we get into that, 91.3 says you are going to be the pilot in command, or PIC. And so you are directly responsible for and the final authority to the operation of that aircraft. So it's kind of a weird transition for people going from the position of a student to now you're the only pilot on board. If you're going up for the first time by yourself after you get your license, or you're flying friends or family, they don't know what you're doing. And so at the end of the day, you are going to be the pilot in command, which is kind of it's a strange transition, but once you do it a few times, you get really used to it and you build more and more confidence. And then you may scare yourself a few times, and then you tear that confidence back down, and then you learn and you keep going. So here's your privileges and limitations, 61.113. So you cannot be pilot in command or carry passengers or carry property for compensation or hire. So your friend can't slip you some money under the table and say, hey, can you fly me to Vegas for the weekend? That's being paid. You need to be a commercial pilot in order to do that. You can act as PIC in connection with a business only if it's incidental. So if you have a business meeting in Las Vegas and you happen to fly yourself to Las Vegas, then it makes sense. This is supposed to say less, so you may not pay less than the pro rata share. So pro rata just means proportional. So you cannot pay less than the proportional share to the expenses for that flight. That falls under fuel, oil, and rental fees. So let's say the total cost of your flight that day for fuel, rental, whatever, was $300. And your friend offers to pay $200 of that. That's less than pro rata on your side of it. So you have to split it 50-50. Operating expenses does not include maintenance. It does not include hangar fees. So if you own a plane, you park it in a hangar, that costs money. If you have to maintain the aircraft, that also costs money. That does not get included with aircraft expenses. You can operate as PIC of a charitable, nonprofit, or community event. You can be reimbursed for search and rescue. So if you're assisting with that, you can be reimbursed. Demonstrate aircraft if a salesperson, and you can also tow a glider. So with some training, you can go out to, who does gliders? Hemet. So you can go out to Hemet You can tie a glider to your airplane, bring them up to altitude, release them, and then they can glide back. So you are allowed to do that. May act as PIC for the purpose of conducting a flight test if requirements are met. So really the big things are, don't pay less than pro rata, you cannot be paid. Those are kind of the big takeaways. Common question is, does your private pilot certificate expire? It does not. So unlike your driver's license, so if you look at your driver's license, there's an expiration on it. So you need to renew it. Your certificate does not. There are certain requirements you need to meet every so often in order to maintain it, but there's no expiration date on that certificate. There are some exceptions. A flight instructor certificate does expire, but I wouldn't worry about that now. But your private pilot does not expire. To continue acting as pilot in command, you need to complete what's called a flight review every 24 calendar months. So every 2 years, you need to meet with a flight instructor and do at least 1 hour of ground, 1 hour of flight, going over the requirements. So it's really just a review of regulations and flight maneuvers and operations required to get your license in the first place. Obviously, they don't want people going 5 years without ever touching an aircraft or reading about their aircraft and then deciding to go fly with the family for fun. So they want people to maintain their knowledge and skills. So that's part one. Part two is to act as PIC while carrying passengers. You need to do 3 takeoffs and landings within the preceding 90 days. So every 3 months, you need to have at least 3 takeoffs and landings logged in order to carry people. If you're flying an aircraft that's a tailwheel, it has to be full stop landings. Otherwise, they can be what's called touch and go, which means you touch down on the runway, continue rolling, add power, and then take off again. So you land and take off all on the same go. You'll do a ton of them, they're fun. So that's for daytime. If you're gonna be flying passengers at night, you also need to meet this requirement for nighttime. So you need to do 3 takeoffs and landings at night. However, this one does require full stop landings at night. But if you have logged 3 takeoffs and landings at night to a full stop, that would also count towards your day, but not the opposite. So there are different requirements or different definitions of nighttime that we will come across. For this one specifically, nighttime refers to 1 hour after sunset and ending one hour before sunrise. So if you change your address, you need to update the FAA within 30 days. It's a small little rule, but it comes up on written tests, and so you got to know it. So as a private pilot, what are you allowed to fly? So it really depends on a few things, something called category, class, and type. So category refers to a broad grouping of aircraft. So you see the top row right there, those are all considered aircraft. That refers to a lighter than air, rotorcraft, airplane, and a glider. Class is a more specific version of the category. So you can have airplane class, and that refers to single engine land, single engine sea, multi-engine land, multi-engine sea. So I highlighted this part because written test questions will come up and it'll say regarding certification of airmen. And so this is what shows up on your license. What category and class can I fly? We'll look at the next slide and it says regarding certification of aircraft. So when an airplane gets certified, so the paperwork that comes with the plane, it'll have different breakdown as well. And so you kind of want to distinguish the differences. And a written test question can easily be confusing if somebody misreads airmen or aircraft. So this is for you, what goes on your license. So when you get your license in the mail, it's going to say private pilot, airplane, single engine land. So that's the category, airplane, class, single engine land. So third one right here, type, doesn't really apply. That's for larger aircraft or jets. So greater than 12,500 pounds, or if it's jet powered. So that's what a type rating is. So anytime an airline pilot, well, if someone becomes an airline pilot, or if they change maybe companies, or if they upgrade to a different aircraft, they have to get type rated in that specific model. So if they go from 737 to 757, they have to get type rated. If they fly something like a Citation, they have to get type rated, or Gulfstream. So if you get asked, what is your type rating, or like, what are you typed in? As a private pilot, you're not. So that'll come later with something larger. So now this one regarding certification of aircraft. So when it says category, it's referring to any one of these. An aircraft can fall under transport category, normal, utility, and so on. Now the class of aircraft, try not to confuse you, this one's class of aircraft. It's similar to categories of the previous slide. So class of aircraft is either going to be airplane, rotorcraft, glider, or lighter than air. So this is what goes on its airworthiness certificate, which is just like its stamp of approval when it comes from the factory. So it'll say category, normal. And then it'll also have a class. So just show you that again. Class, airplane, rotorcraft, glider. That's also the same as category on this one. So logbook. You don't need a specific logbook. Any supply store, Amazon, will have a logbook available for you. If you're planning on even doing a demo flight, I recommend picking up a logbook because you can log your demo flight. That's an hour logged already. So are you required to carry a logbook? Short answer, no. Long answer, yes. So as a student pilot, you must carry it in order to demonstrate your endorsements and your training. So if you're flying an aircraft solo, you cannot demonstrate that approval unless you have those endorsements in your logbook saying, hey, my instructor approved me to go do this flight solo. After that period, once you are licensed, if you need to demonstrate currency, so here's my 3 takeoffs and landings in 90 days to carry passengers. So in order to prove currency, you should carry it. So airplane transitions. So you are licensed in an airplane single engine land. And so if you're going to fly anything else, there's something called high performance, which is an engine more than 200 horsepower. It's not 200 or more, it's more than 200. So there are some engines that are exactly 200, and that doesn't meet a high performance requirement. So it has to be greater than. A complex aircraft, so it's going to have retractable landing gear, controllable pitch propeller, and flaps. So most light training aircraft do not have retractable gear. The propeller is stationary, it's fixed. More advanced aircraft or complex aircraft, you can change the blade angle on the propeller and the gear will come up. Tail wheel. So most modern planes have a wheel on the nose. Older planes or aerobatic planes as well will have the wheel under the tail. So there's specific training that you need for that, and you need to be endorsed in order to fly those. Particularly the characteristics for takeoffs and landings. So you just need to get checked out in that plane. So additional ratings, we already talked about the instrument rating. This is just FYI, you guys don't need to memorize the requirements for instrument rating. It doesn't apply to you, doesn't apply to you at this point in training. This is just in case you were curious. So a couple points. In order to get your instrument rating after your private pilot, you need 50 hours cross-country time as PIC, total of 40 hours of actual or simulated instrument, and 15 hours of instrument flight training from an instructor. So I'd say the hardest for this is building 50 hours of cross-country time as PIC. So when you start flight training, you do not, log PIC time because you are not the pilot in command. The only time you log pilot in command time as a private pilot are anytime you're doing solo flight, because obviously you're the only person on the plane, and after you are licensed. So once you receive your certificate, going forward, you're going to be the pilot in command, even during flight training.
Your solo cross country, does it count towards that though?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so anytime you're by yourself or after you get licensed, you're going to be the PIC.
And aren't you like supposed to get a PIC time when you're like flying with a DP?
Yeah, so technically you're being tested as the PIC. And so, are you saying with the examiner, are you PIC?
Yes, like
Mm-hmm.
when a DP takes like your checkride, like they give you PIC time, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So for logbook purposes, you are PIC. At the end of the day, it's a 60-hour private pilot applicant and a 10,000-hour airline pilot. If a real scenario happens, they can help you. You know, they're not going to make you do it by yourself, and so they're a good resource. And so they'll usually brief you and tell you, hey, if something really happens, we'll work as a team and be safe. Additional class ratings. So even as a private pilot, you can get a multi-engine rating on top of your private pilot certificate. So if you want to fly something like a Seminole or was it DA-40, you can get a seaplane rating. Probably have to go up to like Seattle or something to get one of those. Could be fun. Additional category and class ratings. So, you know, once you knock this off the bucket list, you can go on to get your rotorcraft ratings, helicopter, gyroplane, glider. So as a glider pilot, you still have to do a check ride. I don't know, it's just wild to me. And lighter than air as well. So those are ratings. You'll see the difference in wording. A rating is generally something that is added to a certificate. So when you get your instrument rating, you're still a private pilot, but you're instrument rated. And so it's kind of like an add-on or attachment. Additional certificates or licenses, once you become a commercial pilot, that's a brand new certificate, and that kind of overrides your private pilot certificate. If you become a flight instructor, that's an additional one that you use kind of in conjunction with your commercial pilot. So right now, as a flight instructor, I have to carry both of these together. I cannot carry just the CFI by itself. It doesn't work. I have to carry both of these. And once you get your ATP, that's a brand new certificate by itself, or sport pilot. Usually people get a sport pilot certificate in order to avoid the requirements to become a private pilot, so it would never make sense to get a sport pilot in addition to a private pilot or recreational. So careers, it sounds like most people want to do something aviation related as a career. Most people want to go to an airline. You'll find that a lot of people kind of find their niche as they're going along in aviation. They find that they really like charter operations, so they end up flying something like a Citation or a Gulfstream or a King Air. Aerial photography, power line patrol. You can do things like work for the fire department. Usually fire department requires just as many hours, if not more, than the airline. Police department as well, or like sheriff's department. You become a test pilot, aircraft sales. So you can work for Cessna, you could work for Cirrus. You could do sightseeing, flight instruction, airline pilot, cargo. So if you want to fly for FedEx or something like that, that's a good gig too. So when should you take your practical test or your check ride? So by the time you finish all the requirements, your instructor will determine if you are ready to go take that test. So once you check all the boxes and your instructor can say that you're proficient enough to pass the test, then they will endorse you to go take it. You'll schedule the test and then you'll go take it. So usually kind of the two sides of the practical test or check rides, there's the knowledge portion or oral portion. So it's just conversation. And they're testing your knowledge, your judgment skills, and just overall decision making, really. And then there's a flight portion to it. So you can't do one without the other. Once you finish the ground portion, then you go fly, and they test your proficiency with maneuvers, emergency situations, diversion scenarios. All in all, average for private pilot is about 2 hours each, so 2 hours of ground. Generally has been leaning towards a little bit longer, so 2, 3, up to 4 hours for private pilot, and then about a 2-hour flight. It's stressful. Everybody gets stressed out. A lot of people kind of lose sleep over it just because it's like a big event. But it goes pretty quick. I know right now sitting here, 2 hours seems like a long time to be under that amount of stress. Like, could you imagine your driving test taking 2 hours? But there's just so much to do. It goes by quick. You're just doing things constantly. And it's things you're familiar with already. And so it's not stuff that's brand new to you. So it goes pretty quick. So this was the document I was referring to earlier. So I would recommend downloading this too now, even before like starting training, get familiar with it. So it's called the Airman Certification Standards for Private Pilot. They just released an update that went into effect May 31st. So if you have a previous version, make sure to update it. So this document just outlines everything that you'll be tested on. So what should you know about aerodynamics? What should you know about weather? What maneuvers are you going to have to do? What are the standards for those maneuvers? So how much altitude can I lose while performing a steep turn? Stuff like that. Or if I'm expected to do a short field landing, what is my landing distance required? So again, it's an open document, just like everything else. It's not top secret. They're going to test you on something you've never heard of. It's information that's readily available to everybody. So the person conducting this test is called a Designated Pilot Examiner, or DPE. So this is somebody approved by the FAA to conduct these tests. Oftentimes this is their side gig. So they're either airline pilots or flight instructors that do this kind of on the side. And so they offer their time to do this. How can I say offer? They are paid very well to do these tests. It's paid out of pocket by you. Due to inflation, prices have gone up for these tests. It's generally between $800 and $1,000 just to conduct the test, just for the privilege of taking the test. That doesn't mean you're going to pass. And so generally they accept cash only because people cancel their checks if they don't do well on these tests, or call the credit card company and say like, hey, this is fraudulent, cancel it. So generally it's cash. For the most part, examiners, they want you to pass. There's obviously stories of really grumpy examiners or people that didn't really come off as very friendly. In my experience, most examiners want you to pass. They're on your side. They want you to do well during this test, but they're also kind of handcuffed by the rules of what they need to test you on. And so if you don't meet the standard for that rule, then they have to fail you or discontinue. Yeah, just a review. So usually 2-3 hours for the oral, and then about 2 hours for the flight. So there's 3 outcomes for this. They'll phrase it slightly differently to make it sound a little bit nicer, but it's either pass, fail, or I'll call it pause. So if you start the test and you're like, actually the weather's not looking too good to continue the test, they discontinue. And so that means let's put a bookmark here and we're going to continue the test a different day when the weather's better. So in that case, there's no penalty. It doesn't look bad on you. It's just, hey, we need to continue a different day. Or if you get like an unsatisfactory or a failure, you just retest it a different day.
What are the steps to get a job like that?
So there are hour requirements. I think you need, it's either at least 1,000 hours or 2,000 hours of total time. I think 1,000 hours of instruction provided. So you need to be an instructor at some point. And you need to know somebody, pretty much. Yeah, so if you have a friend that works with the FAA or a friend that's already an examiner, they'll usually help put your name at the top of the list to get recommended. but there's pretty high demand, so hopefully there's going to be more pretty soon. Because right now it's kind of difficult to schedule one of these. You have to reach out to an examiner, and they have a busy schedule. They're busy with their full-time job plus conducting these tests, and so they have to kind of find time to conduct your test. Most of the time you try and conduct it at your home airport because you want your home field advantage. Sometimes you may have to commute to the airport they conduct the tests at. So if their home base is, there's an airport called French Valley out in Marietta or Temecula. So if your examiner only conducts tests there, then you have to fly the plane over there, conduct your test there, and then come back at the end of the day. But most of the time they're pretty accommodating. They want you to succeed, so they'll try to come here to where you did your training.
Once they see it, because it makes them look better, or just?
In general, yeah, in general they want you to succeed. I think it reflects on them as well, like their pass-fail rate. Not that they're going to let people slide that don't meet standards, but they want you to do well.
Good deal for you.
Yeah. Well, it's true. Like people that generally test pretty well have better word of mouth. And so like, oh, I did my test with this guy. He was really nice. He was really fair. And so the next person wants to do it with him, and then it just kind of spreads. Otherwise, people or flight schools, like word goes around, they don't want to conduct a test with you. And so it's a little harder to schedule. Cool. Any questions about the process? So right now I'm going to hand out a short quiz. This is just about topics we've talked about so far. This isn't graded. It doesn't go against your final score as a pilot. It's really just to expose you to more practice questions that will come up on the written test as well as the final test that I conduct.